The Weimar Republic, Democracy in Crisis. The proclamation of the German Republic on November 9, 1918, by Social Democrat Philipp Scheidemann marked the beginning of Germany's first democratic experiment. But the circumstances of its birth created fundamental challenges that would plague the Weimar Republic throughout its existence. The revolution's incomplete character, the persistence of conservative elites in key positions, and the association of democracy with military defeat created a democracy without democrats that faced immediate challenges to its legitimacy. The Constitutional Assembly that convened in Weimar in 1919 created one of the most democratic constitutions in contemporary Europe, with provisions for civil liberties, social rights, and extensive democratic participation. However, the Constitution's weaknesses, particularly Article 48's emergency powers provision and the proportional representation system that encouraged political fragmentation, provided the constitutional mechanisms through which democracy would eventually be destroyed. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms that created lasting resentment and provided ammunition for nationalist opposition to the democratic system. The War Guilt Clause, territorial losses including Alsace-Lorraine and the Polish Corridor, military restrictions, and massive reparations payments created economic and political pressures that undermined democratic stability. The treaty's provisions were seen by many Germans as a dictated peace, diktat, that violated principles of national self-determination and fair treatment. The early years of the Republic were marked by revolutionary upheavals that challenged both the democratic government and the traditional social order. The Spartacist uprising in Berlin, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, and numerous strikes and political assassinations created an atmosphere of civil war that polarized German politics. The murder of prominent Republicans like Matthias Erzberger and Walter Rathenau by right-wing extremists demonstrated the violence of anti-democratic opposition. The hyperinflation crisis of 1922 to 1923 destroyed middle-class savings and created social chaos that further undermined confidence in democratic institutions. The occupation of the Ruhr by French and Belgian forces following Germany's default on reparations payments created a national crisis that brought the Republic close to collapse. Gustav Stresemann's policy of fulfillment and the introduction of the Rentenmark stabilized the currency, but at enormous social cost. The Golden Age and its limitations. The period from 1924 to 1929 represented the Weimar Republic's most successful years, characterized by economic recovery, international reconciliation, and cultural flowering. The Dawes Plan's rescheduling of reparations payments and American loans provided the foundation for economic stabilization, while diplomatic successes like the Locarno Treaties and Germany's admission to the League of Nations restored international respectability. Gustav Stresemann's foreign policy of understanding, Verständigung, sought to revise the Versailles settlement through negotiation rather than confrontation. The Locarno Treaties, 1925, guaranteed Germany's western borders while leaving open the possibility of peaceful revision in the east. The Kellogg-Briand Pact and the Young Plan further reduced international tensions while addressing German concerns about reparations and sovereignty. The cultural achievements of the Weimar period established Germany as a center of modernist innovation in art, literature, architecture, and intellectual life. The Bauhaus School revolutionized design and architecture, while writers like Thomas Mann, Bertolt Brecht, and Alfred Döblin created literary works that captured the complexity of modern urban life. The film industry, centered in Berlin, produced masterpieces like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Metropolis that influenced global cinema. However, the Republic's apparent stability masked fundamental weaknesses that would be exposed by the Great Depression. The economy's dependence on American loans created vulnerability to international economic fluctuations, while the persistence of anti-democratic attitudes among key elites meant that democratic institutions lacked deep roots in German society. The growth of extremist parties on both left and right demonstrated the continuing polarization of German politics. The cultural conflicts of the period, particularly the clash between traditional and modern values, created social tensions that extremist movements exploited. The debate over cultural Bolshevism and the reaction against modernist art and literature reflected deeper anxieties about social change and national identity. These cultural conflicts would later be exploited by Nazi propaganda to mobilize support for radical solutions to Germany's problems. The rise of National Socialism. The Great Depression's impact on Germany was particularly severe due to the economy's dependence on foreign loans and the persistence of structural problems from the war and inflation periods. Unemployment rose to over 6 million by 1932, while industrial production collapsed and agricultural prices fell dramatically. The economic crisis created social desperation that radical political movements exploited to gain support. The Nazi Party's transformation from a fringe movement to a mass party reflected both the crisis of democratic politics and the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda and organization. Adolf Hitler's charismatic leadership, combined with sophisticated propaganda techniques and paramilitary organization through the SA, Sturmabteilung, created a movement that appealed to diverse social groups united by their opposition to the existing system. Nazi ideology combined extreme nationalism, racial anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and promises of economic recovery in a package that resonated with German anxieties and aspirations. The concept of the Volksgemeinschaft, people's community, promised to overcome class divisions and create national unity, while the identification of external enemies, Jews, communists, foreign powers, provided scapegoats for Germany's problems. The political maneuvering that brought Hitler to power demonstrated the failure of traditional conservative politicians to understand the Nazi threat. Franz von Pappen's belief that he could control Hitler as chancellor while serving as vice-chancellor reflected the conservative elite's fatal underestimation of Nazi ruthlessness and organizational capabilities. President Hindenburg's appointment of Hitler as chancellor on January 30, 1933, represented the legal revolution that destroyed German democracy. The Enabling Act of March 1933, passed under conditions of intimidation and with the support of conservative parties, provided the legal foundation for Nazi dictatorship. The elimination of trade unions, political parties, and federal state governments proceeded systematically, while the coordination, Gleichschaltung, of social organizations created the institutional framework for totalitarian control. The Third Reich, totalitarian rule and war. The establishment of Nazi totalitarian rule involved the systematic destruction of civil society and the creation of new institutions designed to mobilize the entire population for the regime's ideological and political goals. The development of the SS as a parallel state organization, the creation of concentration camps for political prisoners, and the establishment of the Gestapo as a secret police force provided the instruments of terror necessary to maintain control. Nazi economic policies combined public works programs, rearmament, and autarkic trade policies to reduce unemployment and prepare for war. The construction of the Autobahn system, the development of synthetic materials industries, and massive military spending created economic recovery that enhanced the regime's popularity. However, these policies also created structural imbalances and resource shortages that could only be resolved through territorial expansion and plunder. The implementation of Nazi racial ideology through the Nuremberg Laws, 1935, and subsequent anti-Semitic legislation systematically excluded Jews from German society and prepared the ground for later genocidal policies. The November 1938 Kristallnacht pogrom demonstrated the regime's commitment to violent anti-Semitism while testing public reaction to anti-Jewish violence. Nazi foreign policy pursued territorial expansion through a combination of diplomatic pressure, military intimidation, and ultimately military conquest. The remilitarization of the Rhineland, 1936, the Anschluss with Austria, 1938, and the annexation of the Sudetenland, 1938, achieved major territorial gains without military resistance. However, The invasion of Poland in September 1939 finally precipitated the European war that Hitler had been preparing for since coming to power. The early German victories in Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, and France seemed to vindicate Nazi ideology and military strategy. The development of blitzkrieg tactics, combining tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry, revolutionized warfare and enabled rapid territorial conquest. However, the failure to defeat Britain and the decision to invade the Soviet Union created a two-front war that ultimately exceeded German capabilities. The Holocaust and crimes against humanity. The Nazi genocide of European Jews represented the most systematic and extensive crime against humanity in recorded history. The evolution from legal discrimination through ghettoization to mass murder reflected the regime's radicalization and the implementation of its core ideological commitment to racial anti-Semitism. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked the beginning of mass murder operations as Einsatzgruppen units systematically killed Jewish communities across Eastern Europe. The Wannsee Conference of January 1942 coordinated the final solution: the plan to murder all European Jews through industrialized killing methods implemented in specially constructed extermination camps. The network of concentration camps, extermination camps, and combined concentration extermination camps created a system of unprecedented scope and efficiency for mass murder. The camps at Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, and other locations represented the industrialization of genocide, with gas chambers capable of killing thousands of people daily. The Holocaust was not limited to Jews, but included the systematic murder of other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology, including Roma and Sinti, disabled individuals, Polish intellectuals, Soviet prisoners of war, and Jehovah's Witnesses. The Action T4 euthanasia program provided both the ideological justification and technical methods later used in the Holocaust. The complicity of ordinary Germans, collaborating governments, and local populations across occupied Europe demonstrated the breadth of participation in genocidal crimes. However, resistance also existed, from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to the activities of rescue networks like those organized by Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg. Defeat, occupation, and division. Germany's military defeat in May 1945 resulted from the overwhelming superiority of the Allied coalition and the exhaustion of German resources through total war. The Soviet offensive from the east, combined with Anglo-American advances from the west, created an impossible strategic situation that not even Germany's desperate development of new weapons technologies could resolve. The immediate aftermath of defeat involved the complete collapse of German state authority and the implementation of Allied occupation policies designed to denazify, democratize, demilitarize, and decentralize German society. The Potsdam Conference, July 1945, established the framework for occupation, including the division of Germany into 4 zones, administered by the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France. The Nuremberg Trials, 1945 to 1949, established important precedents in international law by holding individuals accountable for war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. The trials provided a legal reckoning with Nazi crimes while establishing historical documentation that would be crucial for later educational and memorial efforts. The growing tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union gradually transformed occupation policies and led to the division of Germany into 2 separate states. The formation of Bizonia, 1946, and Trizonia, 1948, created the economic and political foundation for West German independence, while Soviet policies in the Eastern Zone established a communist system modeled on the Soviet Union. The Berlin Blockade, 1948 to 1949, represented the first major crisis of the Cold War and demonstrated the impossibility of 4-power cooperation in governing Germany. The successful Allied airlift and the eventual Soviet abandonment of the blockade established West Berlin as a symbol of freedom and Western commitment to German democracy. Federal Republic, Democracy and Prosperity. The establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany in May 1949 marked the beginning of Germany's most successful democratic experiment. The Basic Law, Grundgesetz, drafted by the Parliamentary Council under the presidency of Konrad Adenauer, created a stable constitutional framework that balanced federal and state authority while protecting individual rights and democratic institutions. Adenauer's chancellorship, 1949 to 1963, established the fundamental orientations of West German foreign and domestic policy. The policy of Westbindung, Western integration, aligned the Federal Republic with NATO and the European integration process, while the concept of chancellor democracy created strong executive leadership within a parliamentary system. The economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, under economics minister Ludwig Erhard, transformed West Germany into one of the world's most prosperous societies. The social market economy combined free market principles with social welfare provisions and regulatory frameworks that created both economic dynamism and social stability. The currency reform of 1948, the Marshall Plan aid, and the gradual liberalization of trade restrictions provided the foundation for sustained economic growth that continued through the 1960s. The development of democratic political culture in West Germany involved both institutional learning and generational change. The 1968 student movement challenged authoritarian traditions and demanded confrontation with the Nazi past, while the emergence of new political movements like the Greens reflected the diversification of democratic participation. Reunification and contemporary challenges. The peaceful revolution in East Germany during 1989, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, created the opportunity for German reunification after 40 years of division. The rapid collapse of the East German state reflected both the failure of communist economic policies and the success of peaceful protest movements inspired by developments in other Eastern European countries. Chancellor Helmut Kohl's policy of rapid reunification through the extension of West German institutions to the former East Germany created immediate political unity, but also enormous economic and social challenges. The economic transformation of the eastern states required massive financial transfers and created unemployment and social disruption that persisted for decades. German reunification also required extensive diplomatic efforts to gain international acceptance and address concerns about German power in Europe. The 2+4 Treaty, 1990, provided the international legal framework for reunification while confirming Germany's commitment to European integration and peaceful relations with its neighbors. Contemporary Germany faces challenges that reflect both its historical experiences and current global developments. The integration of immigrants and refugees, particularly following the 2015 refugee crisis, has created social tensions while also demonstrating Germany's commitment to humanitarian values. The rise of the Alternative for Germany, AfD, as a right-wing populist party represents the first successful challenge to the post-war democratic consensus since the 1950s. Germany's role in European integration has evolved from a junior partner seeking rehabilitation to the European Union's de facto leader during crises like the Eurozone crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. The tension between German economic interests and European solidarity continues to shape debates about the future of European integration. The memory of the Nazi period remains central to German political culture and international relations. The development of a sophisticated memorial culture, including institutions like the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe and the extensive network of concentration camp memorials, reflects Germany's commitment to confronting its historical responsibilities while educating future generations about the dangers of authoritarianism and racial hatred. The challenges of climate change, digitalization, and demographic change test Germany's capacity for adaptation and reform. The Energiewende, energy transition, represents an ambitious attempt to transform Germany's energy system while maintaining economic competitiveness. The country's response to these challenges will shape not only Germany's future, but also its continued role as a leading European and global power. The history of Germany demonstrates both the possibilities and the dangers of modern political development. From the fragmentation of the medieval Holy Roman Empire through the horrors of the Nazi period to the success of democratic reconstruction and reunification, German history provides crucial lessons about the conditions necessary for peaceful development and the consequences of political failure. Understanding this history remains essential for comprehending not only Germany's contemporary role, but also the broader patterns of European and global development in the modern era.